And we assess about 300 companies a year, all sizes and sectors, heavily in the healthcare sector these days. I would say probably 40% of the companies we're assessing who are buying this insurance are in that sector. But these are all the common threats that we see on a daily basis. It is still the SQL injection issues. We talked about, earlier panels talked about that. Most companies have SQL databases, and the bad guys are still able to get in there through an exploit. And one of the problems I'll talk about a little bit later on is some of the things programmers are doing that allows that to happen. Lost laptops, constantly. Almost every company we assess admits to some kind of a lost laptop, and it's amazing how many times there's private information on there. Folks take it out in the field. It has no password protection, and very seldom do you see encryption on there. And the shame of it is, it wasn't brought up earlier, but if you do have encryption, many times you have safe harbor. You never even have to notify the world about your event. Backup tapes. Backup tape losses. We've read a number of these incidents in the paper where folks send their backup tapes to Iron Mountain, and somehow it mysteriously falls off the UPS truck, and they have to notify the world about that. And the real big one, besides malicious events, I would say the bigger threat, and a lot of us agree on this, is just human error, staff mistakes, leakages, things like that. We see that very common where emails go out with a lot of private information. They accidentally hit that send button. Denial of service attacks is more of a first-party issue, and we do see clients facing this where they're actually extorted and brought down because they didn't pay some kind of a ransom. And then finally, business partner mishaps are huge. Most of the times you're reading about companies in the paper that had a breach. If you really read the whole story, you're going to find out it was some typically smaller business partner that was supporting them that actually had the breach. But that company ends up in the press. So we try to give some anecdotal evidence of what's happening. We're always canvassing what some of the leading authorities are saying. I love the guys at Verizon. They do a great forensic study each year. Chris Novak is going to be speaking here tomorrow. One of the sessions, excellent. They do a great study each year. This is some of their stats. Threat source. They're seeing roughly 75% of attacks still coming from external, but 32%, literally one-third, are a result of your business partners. 67% resulting from mistakes. 99% of the breaches were compromised by servers and applications as opposed to laptops being lost. And 81% of those folks were actually non-compliant with standards such as PCI. The other interesting thing I pulled out from a huge packet of information was, again, 70% of the folks that had a breach did not discover the breach themselves. And we see that consistently. Most companies just cannot detect the breach of their own network. They're told about a breach by some third party, whether it's Visa outing them because they correlate that they had some breach happen, or a bank telling them they had a breach, or just the victim saying this was what happened. And then finally, 87% of breaches they believe are avoidable through what we call baseline controls. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The Poneman Institute, everybody loves a quote, Larry Poneman. I figured I'll throw one statistic up there. He does a lot of canvassing of companies in the privacy area. 85% of businesses incurred a data breach this past year. That's up from 60% in 08, which is significant. And the average cost $20,000 for medical identity breach. The other study we'd like to keep track of, the FBI does one every year with the Computer Security Institute. This is from 09. Basically, average cost per incident, they're estimating at $700,000. Financial fraud being $450,000. 1/3 of the organizations were, and this was mentioned earlier when a gentleman was talking about the phishing, the spear phishing at lunch. 1/3 of all organizations were fraudulently represented as a sender of a phishing message. So I get messages all the time from my bank in Philadelphia, a huge bank called PNC. It's actually not coming from them. It's coming from some bad guy. He's not actually directing it at me. He's directing it to everybody in the Philadelphia area. So that's an amazing statistic. Despite the fact that 7% characterizes actually healthcare services, 57% of all companies are saying they need to comply with that high-tech standard. So that, the folks in the earlier panel mentioned high-tech. It's getting a lot of legs. A lot of our clients are talking about that, and they're not even in officially the healthcare sector.